Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
And somehow you have to really awaken, take a lot of LSD for a year. And, that's what I would, prescribe to people, put down your guns and take a lot of LSD for a year, and then come back and see if you need the gun anymore, and the chances are you won't, you'll realize that there's a better way. On Fox News or MSNBC, even though they're on opposite sides of the political crisis that we're in, right? Neither one of them ever talks about the CIA. They don't name CIA officers. They don't say, and today in the Congo, the CIA is supporting this particular warlord and installing this particular politician in order to make it easier to get to build the microchips in your iPhones. They don't do it, either side. But, if you're a writer, you don't stop thinking. And if you're thinking up ideas, you got to write them down. So you try and take time off, and it's kind of like pushing what against the tide. So it just never seemed to get a break, It's been this way for 40 years.
Do you have anything specific that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I'm working on a new book. I actually got 2 books. If you want to talk about them on the interview, we can.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can just talk about them now. But I took a trip to went to London and Vietnam and Thailand in 1991 in February. I was hired as a consultant for BBC, which was doing a documentary on the CIA. They hired me before I got in trouble with the CIA. And then they were stuck with me because we had a contract with them. Anyway, I met some interesting people in London. I was just kind of a young upstart then 30 years ago, and met some older people that had been in the business, going after the CIA for a long time, and they helped me prepare to go to Vietnam and Thailand. And when I got to Thailand, things went off the rails, and BBC put me in a room by myself in a hotel by myself down by the river, and nobody know how to get a visa from London, because the United States didn't have diplomatic relations with Vietnam at the time. So I was on my own, and I ended up meeting some people just accidentally, and they invited me out to their village in the Vietnam, and I went out there and ended up getting arrested near the Cambodian border in Vietnam. And anyway, I managed to get away and get back, and went to Thailand. And in Thailand, I met one of the guys I interviewed was Tony Tony Po, the guy they based the movie Apocalypse Now on, with Marlon Brando. I met that guy at his house. I met people in Chiang Mai who were involved in drug trafficking, CIA people. So it was kind of an adventurous thing, but it's I'm calling it Searching for the CIA. Brutal truths, beliefs in brutal truths in modern America. And that's about all the crap that people believe and how it makes them do all sorts of stupid shit. And not just people who are investigating the CIA or people in the CIA, but all sorts of people everywhere. They got an idea in their head, that this is the way it is. I don't let go, whether they're a Catholic or a Buddhist or a communist or anti-communist. And it's really, kind of a philosophic thing in a way, but it's just based on all different people I met on that trip and the things that happened to me, and try to sum up. It brings it all back to what happened on January 6th, and how a mob of people could be willing to kill and die and wave the flag for something that they believe in. That's obviously just a big fat lie. How people get all riled up and do the crazy shit they do. So try to put that in perspective. And then I'm working on another book at the same time, which is a love story, which is just as impossible, love. It's another kind of belief. And, to believe that you're in love. But what's love, And so it sort of talks about that the same way.
Sound super interesting, and I can't wait to dive into those. Douglas, that is my brother, Richard.
Hey, Doug.
He was the one who brought you to my attention to get you on the podcast. So we're super stoked to have you on today. You're talking about writing a fiction book and a nonfiction book at the same time. How do you balance doing both of those at the same time?
Well, the love story's got to be fiction because, real people are involved. You gotta prevent what is it? You got to protect the innocent, and all that stuff. But the book about me traveling around to Vietnam and Thailand, that's all nonfiction. That's, I took notes and stuff like that. So one book's fiction and one book's nonfiction. But, again, to get back to this stuff, what's the difference? You can change the names. And you could say it happened in Tampa instead of Fort Lauderdale, but when you read a really good work of fiction, it's true. The thing about a good fiction book is that you believe it, you read it and it makes sense. Half the time that you read nonfiction, like journalism, you're not getting a story. You're getting something that's skewed and edited over by somebody who wants to be careful, and so writers generally are much freer when they're writing fiction to tell the truth. And when you're writing nonfiction, then all of a sudden you get into academia, and you get into rules about conformity and what's okay to say and what isn't okay to say. So writing nonfiction can be a lot more challenging in some ways than writing fiction, although fiction often relies on a lot of dialogue. And it's not easy to write dialogue and to reconstruct conversations, meaningful conversations that you have with people, like we can record. So anything that I say that's meaningful, it's there. But if you're a writer like F. Scott Fitzgerald, and you want to write a book like The Great Gatsby, which is, lots and lots of dialogue, how do you reconstruct meaningful dialogue between, people that gets across? Well, Fitzgerald had this photographic memory. So he would go to parties in the roaring 20s. And while everybody else was getting drunk and talking shit, he'd be sitting there with his photographic memory recording everything that they said to each other. And then he would go back home and he'd write it all down till, like early in the morning. And then he would base his novels on that kind of stuff. So what's fiction? What's not fiction? When Seymour Hersh writes an article about something or even one of his nonfiction books, you know, he treads a line and he writes in a style that's, you know, the journalistic style of you're not supposed to be emotional and you can't bring emotion into the article. You can't talk about, well, you know, you can't name the CIA officer and you can't tell, well, how he really felt about things or what his personal motivations were. You know, it's just the facts, man, kind of crap. And you know, you're not getting the whole story. You know, you're getting something that's you know, made squashed into a New York Times column, you know, or been processed food, you know. So I don't know, you know, I mean, there was a thing back in the late 60s, which they called New Journalism. I don't know that you guys ever heard about that, but writers like Gay Talese and Truman Capote, you know, Truman Capote in Cold Blood. He wrote that book about these guys who invaded that home somewhere in Kansas and, you know, killed the family. And it was nonfiction. But he did it in this emotional kind of a way. And where people would read it and be like truly horrified because you knew he was interviewing the guy who wanted to kill us in prison and stuff like that and come back with the things that he told them. And it was this whole new kind of journalism that started to affect how people were writing. Okay, I remember as a little kid, people wanted me to. I was going to high school, and I was reading good books in high school, but I wanted to run to the library and read Truman Capote books and this kind of new journalism, you know, and stuff that was like firing up my imagination in a way that other books weren't. And that led to all sorts of confusion in the publishing industry when guys like Truman Capote and Gay Talese were writing in this form, in this way, about, well, what's truth and what's fiction. And people started expanding it and pushing it. And it got to the point where actual journalists were making up stories, you know, making up like informants so that they could, you know, and say, well, there was this famous case of a woman named Gail Sheehy who wrote a story about a prostitute who she called Red Pants or something like that. And it was a composite character. It was you know, Red Pants was like, you know, the composite of 20 or 30 prostitutes that she had spoken with. And people were just outraged, you know, I mean, at the time, you know, how could you do this? You know, you tricked us, you faked us out, you made us think it was one person. And so there was a reaction and people went back to, you know, all the editorial boards and stuff like that would react. Just said, no, you can't do this anymore. You know, and so the publishers and the editors, they really control what's being written, and all that kind of energy about trying to understand what life in America is really about. You can't find it out from nonfiction anymore because it's controlled. So it all gets channeled into fiction. And that's where you find Mark Twain. You know, now Mark Twain wrote wonderful stories about, wonderful nonfiction articles about America's war in the Philippines. You know, he was outraged and he read the reports coming in and he would talk about it, nonfiction. But the article, you know, but nobody even knows about that. You know, nobody knows that Mark Twain was writing nonfiction stories, you know, criticizing American imperialism. All he knows is that he wrote, you know, really funny stories about what it meant to be an American out west and stuff like that. And those are the things that define him. And those are the things that become the models for what people should conform to when they think of themselves as an American. A book like Herman Melville, Moby Dick. Oh, fabulous book. He gets on this boat, a whaling ship, and what's it all about? What's he talking about? Captain Ahab, represents something. It's metaphorical. Who is this guy? There's this guy in the ship. There's all these Polynesian people with tattoos all over their heads, and faces, and it's just this like wild crowd of people, and they're out on this ship of fools hunting on this expedition to do away with this, to find and destroy what this guy considers to be evil. And it's a metaphor for America. But is it fact or is it fiction? Was he actually on a ship like that? Did a ship like that exist? And it makes you wonder, and it fuels your imagination. And those are the things that are considered great literature and nonfiction. What does it really tell us? So in this experiment that I'm doing with my book, which I'm calling Searching for the CIA, Beliefs and Brutal Truths in Modern America, I'm trying to bring the philosophy of what it means to be an American. And this is what Melville and Mark Twain were trying to do. They were trying to tell, what does it mean to be an American? And I'm trying to do that in a nonfiction way by talking about my own journey. And this journey was in 1991, but I'm writing it from the perspective of 2021, looking back on it. So I can skip all over. I can talk about how things have evolved. I can talk about the CIA people I met, what they did, what the results of their operations were. And I'm modeling myself on this character, call me Ishmael, who went off on the Pequot, the boat that, sailed out into the sea, and that's what I think of when I write a book like this, that I want to try to tell what it means to be an American by telling people what happened to me on this voyage and the people I met, the Americans I met, and the things they believe, what people believe in Vietnam and what people believe in Thailand, the people I met, why they did the things they did, and compare it to what happened now. So, there's a intellectual structure to the whole thing. And then the idea is that I can actually stay awake at the age of 71. I don't sleep much anymore. I don't have the energy that I used to have to try to get something like this done in as few words as possible, and make it entertaining and show how things have evolved in the last 30 years and even, going back to the 60s and stuff like that, and to show how we got to the point that we're in right now in the United States.
We mentioned the CIA quite a few times here, and that's how I came to know about you through Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli. Can you speak about Operation Phoenix and what was going on in Vietnam and how you got interested in the CIA?
Well, sure. I just stumbled into it. I had written a book about my father, who was a prisoner of war, World War II. And nobody in the family knew he'd been a POW. And the circumstances of that, his being in this camp was that the prisoners mutinied against their commanding officer, killed him. And so when the camp was liberated, because he had made a deal with the Japanese, and in order to take control over the prisoners, and my father had PTSD all his life, and had projected that his psychological problems onto our family, so that the kids of veterans understand what I'm talking about if they've been, traumatized, combat veterans, the soldiers come home. Oh, I can't talk about what they did. You know, we went into this village and people were shooting out, so we killed everybody in the village. You know, I mean, that's not something you know, when the kid says, what'd you do in the war, Dad, that you talk about. So the soldiers carry this stuff. And they don't talk about it. And because they don't talk about it, they project it onto the family, and the families become dysfunctional. So what happened to my father when he revealed this to me after his second open heart surgery is the doctor said, you got to talk about this or you're going to die. So he told me about it. It brought about a reconciliation between us, my father and I. He said, you know, it was, you know, all the problems that we had together was my fault because I was carrying this thing around and I didn't talk about it. And I was the adult and you were the kid. So I want to know, being the kind of person I am and thinking the way that I am, I thought that that was a metaphor. What happened to my father and I was allegorical in terms of my whole generation, the Vietnam generation, okay? And our fathers had been heroes in World War II, which of course is a crock of shit. And if you don't mind me speaking that way.
No.
And you know, I mean, my father started revealing to me what happened in that prison camp, you know, what happened to him in New Guinea as a soldier, you know, I mean, he said, you know, there's no heroes, there's no cowards on the front lines, you know, I mean, it's just one day you're there and the next day you're not. And what happened in the prison camp is like what happened in the Holocaust, you know, for in the Nazi concentration camps, you know, I mean, when you're defenseless, again, you know, when you're a prisoner, you can't rely on a gun. And what does it mean to be tough and to survive? And what do you have to do? These things are unimaginable to civilians. And what happened in the Vietnam War and what happened to guys in Iraq and Afghanistan tends to be unimaginable to civilians back home. And the military tries to present their experiences in ways that civilians can relate to it in some way, so that somehow you can relate to Pa or your brother or your son or something. And again, it's this difference between fiction and nonfiction. You know, there's all these different things going on at once, and I wanted to find out if there was something that had happened in the Vietnam War, which had affected American soldiers the way my father had been affected in that POW camp. And somebody told me, you know, the whole idea was not to investigate the CIA. It was try to understand what's going on in America and why we behave the way we do. And this guy at a VA hospital said, Phoenix program. I said, find out about the Phoenix program. That was part of the Vietnam War that nobody's allowed to talk about, but it actually represented what the Vietnam War really was. So I said, well, what's Phoenix program? He said, well, there's a guy here that was in it. And he tried to get that guy to talk to me. And the guy had been in special forces, but the guy wouldn't talk to me. I was afraid that he would lose his VA benefits if he went public with what happened in the Phoenix program. So right away I was hooked. You know, I mean, it's like, tell me it's a secret. Well, then I'm gonna find out what the secret is, you know? And so I read up on the Phoenix program and found out that the guy who was most associated with it was a CIA officer named William Colby, who had been in charge of the Phoenix program in South Vietnam from like 68 to 72, something like that. And Colby had been director of the CIA from 73 to 75 or 76. So not being a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism and not knowing what the protocols are for lowlifes to try and approach the elite, I just wrote Colby a letter and I said, hey, I'd like to come down and talk to you about the Phoenix program. I wrote a book about my father who was a POW. And not knowing any better, you know, that's just what I did. And he wrote me back and said, sure, come on down, I'll talk to you. So, you know, it started and I had no idea what I was getting into. I was very naive. but Colby liked me, and you know, it's a mystery to this day, but he started introducing me to the most senior officers who worked for him in the Phoenix program. And he would set up he set up, you know, initially 5 or 6 interviews for me with guys who had been senior CIA officers in South Vietnam, involved in the Phoenix program, coordinated a bunch of programs that were already in existence in South Vietnam. It brought them all together in 1967. Phoenix was a coordination program. It was more of a bureaucratic thing that brought together and controlled how the war was being fought. And it was created in 1967, and the idea was to identify and kill or imprison all the communist cadres in South Vietnam. Okay, and they had already by 1967 put in a lot of the CIA had been in South Vietnam running like since 1954, so they'd had 13 years to put in place a lot of programs. And Phoenix was originally called ICEX, I-C-E-X, Intelligence, Coordination, and Exploitation. And then, but that was a kind of a non-sexy name, so they changed it to Phoenix, which sounded cool. And the Phoenix program set up a ICEX, what was called an IOC, Intelligence Operations Coordinating Center, in every one of South Vietnam's 244 districts. And this IOC, which was then called a DIOC because it was in a district, brought together every military, police, intelligence, paramilitary, civic program that was involved in finding out who the Viet Cong were, identifying them, and trying to capture, kill them. And if you know, or turn them into double agents. And that's what Phoenix was. The CIA had decided that the only way it could win the war in South Vietnam was to kill off all communist cadres, because the people supported the communists. And you know, you got to remember, the Americans are not Buddhists. They're not South Vietnam. The people they put in power were all their little puppets, who they allowed to make millions of dollars dealing narcotics. And the narcotics were being sold to American soldiers, you know, and the whole thing had gotten out of control. And so they created Phoenix for this primary purpose of identifying and killing all the communists and anybody who supported them, or anybody who could be said to be supporting them. And the second point was to terrorize everybody else in South Vietnam into supporting the CIA and its puppet rulers. A very important and significant CIA officer I interviewed, his name was Lucien Conin, Lou Conin, Black Luigi. He'd been in the OSS and he'd been in the French Foreign Legion before the OSS, and parachuted into Marseille, and during the World War II worked with the resistance. He'd been initiated into the Union Course, the Corsican underworld, like the Corsican Mafia, because he worked with the Corsican Mafia in Marseille in World War II, and he knew all these guys. And he was, you know, like Mac the Knife kind of a character. And I interviewed him about Phoenix, and he said Phoenix was the greatest blackmail scheme ever invented. Either you do what I tell you to do, or you're VC, and your name goes on a blacklist, and we'll hunt you down and kill you and your family. That's what the CIA guy said to me. You know, I mean, that was it in a nutshell. And so they tried to terrorize, you know, by going after the leaders to terrorize everybody else. And that part of terrorizing everybody else, that's called pacification. All right, the idea that using psychological warfare, trying to terrorize everybody that'll do what you say. So I interviewed people at every level in the chain of command of the Phoenix program. It's all in my book. And then when 9/11 happened, And they implemented, the government in Bush administration implemented created the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, one of the guys who created the Department of Homeland Security, who at the time was a major general named Bruce Lawler, was a CIA officer. I had an interview for the Phoenix program book who'd been involved in the Phoenix program. And he basically took the Phoenix structure, this IOC structure, intelligence operations coordinating centers, and he used them to create the fusion centers in the United States, which became the basis of the Department of Homeland Security. And so, 40 years, 30 years after the CIA created Phoenix program in South Vietnam, it was imported here to the United States and established as the Department of Homeland Security. Same thing. The Department of Homeland Security brings together, through these fusion centers, every military, police, civic, paramilitary, Proud Boy organization that's operating in the United States, and it coordinates them and it uses them to create vast informant nets that say everything that's going on that could be considered in any way a threat against the homeland, against national security. So for 20 years, we've been living basically under this domestic Phoenix program, which is so far beyond the comprehension of the average person that they don't know whether they're working for it or working against it. I mean, there's no way for anybody to know anymore what the truth is or what the facts are. We don't know if we're living in a fictional movie or a nonfiction book. I mean, nobody knows what the truth is anymore. And the only thing that matters is that the power to control the messaging, there's some sort of conflict going on to control the messaging, but the fact of the matter is security is located in these fusion centers in this Department of Homeland Security and all the intelligence. The United States created the NORTHCOM. At the same time, it created the Department of Homeland Security. NORTHCOM is a military organization that controls North America. It was created to be the central part of the Department of Homeland Security. So, the military is directly involved. It's like the backbone of this structure, this Homeland Security structure, along with the FBI and ICE. And Department of Homeland Security brings together everybody, down to your local PD. They're all plugged into the same computer networks, and there's people analyzing it. And the CIA is involved. Like I said, the CIA actually are the people that created the model for this thing, and they oversee the whole apparatus because ultimately it's to make sure that nobody from overseas is coming sneaking into the United States and doing some dastardly deed here that they're not allowed to do. So that's the situation that we're in. And it involves, and the primary weapon of this whole Homeland Security apparatus, just like it was in Vietnam, is psychological warfare. It's to create a message that makes everybody afraid. That's what the Patriot Act did. It is to frighten American citizens to the point where they're willing to give up all their liberties for security. And that's, and then once you've made that leap in your mind as an individual, then you have become a subject of whatever kind of bullshit the government or even powerful politicians or billionaires who control media outlets want to put into your head. Then you're susceptible to all this stuff. So the just in South Vietnam, the people resisted. I won the war. And Phoenix wasn't able to terrorize them into submission. They had something to believe in, which unified them. You know, they wanted Americans out of their country. It was that simple. But wanted to determine for themselves what they were going to be, who they were going to be, where their country was going to go. And they fought and they fought and they fought, put their lives on the line, and they kicked the Americans out. And they're puppets. Well, what do you do in the United States? You know, how do you know what the right side is anymore? What's right? But, you know, I mean, what does it mean to be an American? It's still the same basic question that Herman Melville and Mark Twain were trying to answer when they were writing their books, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, or James Baldwin, or the Black Panthers, or anybody. What does it mean? You know, when you wave the flag, what does it represent? And it's become meaningless, and it can be used for any purpose, you know, because people believe whatever they want to believe anymore. But there's, you know, it's actually within this chaos that's been created in the United States deliberately by the powers that be. The powers that be still control all security functions, if you see what I'm saying. All right. While they have half of us at each other's against the other's throats, the billionaires keep making more and more money, and nobody knows anything. Nobody's powerless to try to bridge like the income inequality gulf, you know, and so you know, the United States is being divvied up into like little warlords, you know, nation states. It's just crazy, but it's certainly not crazy for the people who are pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's exactly what they've wanted all along, and it would only be if there was something that could turn us all to South Vietnamese patriots to fight this thing, you know, in some unified way that we could overcome it. But it's a lot easier for people overseas to fight an imperial invader than it is for United States citizens here in the country to find something to unify them, to find some kind of common belief. I mean, this has been the problem with the country since its inception. It's kind of a schizophrenia. And so anybody who's writing about America and what it actually means to be an American, you know, has to include this inherent schizophrenia in the narrative, because that's where we're at, you know. It's kind of a mass psychosis.
So based on
kind of a long explanation of what the Phoenix program is about, but it's a big deal, you know, and it's a vast thing that encompasses a lot of facets. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Based on everything you just said, was the purpose of Vietnam just psychological warfare over the population?
Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest part of it, but there's other parts too. You know, I mean, the CIA, what its object is to manipulate, control, create, destroy political and social movements in foreign countries. You understand? To actually affect the politics and society in foreign countries, and to do it covertly without those people knowing that this is happening to them. Okay, so you do it by, the CIA does it by ingratiating itself with citizens of a country that they want to manipulate, and having, you know, giving them money to set up TV stations and create newspapers, or create a labor union, or create businesses, like, you know, transportation, or any kind of businesses, you know, I mean, and then to use the people that it helps to, that it's funding, to then present the message that they want presented. They want to control, CIA tries to control politics, politicians, and the leaders of civic institutions in foreign countries. And in exchange for taking money from the CIA or getting a leg up, you know, against a competitor, they then promote the American line in that country. until eventually that country is doing America's bidding. You know, you can see it happened in Ukraine, and you see it happening all around the world all the time. But the object of the CIA, its ultimate object is to, you know, just to put it concisely, to control and manipulate political and social and even religious movements in foreign countries. Well, believe me when I tell you that's the same thing that's happening here. The powers that be are controlling political, social, and religious movements here in the United States. And it's through their influence with powerful business people, politicians, media, that they're able to do that. And they have a plan, just like there was a plan in South Vietnam to direct things in a particular direction. Sometimes the CIA creates in a foreign country competing social movements as a way of destabilizing the country. They'll support the left wing and they'll support the right wing in a country they want to destabilize. So they'll actually work with communists, you know, and give them all the money they want and weapons illegally. And then they'll give the right wing, the fascists, all the money and guns and everything they want. Then the country goes to war and the CIA swoops in and buys real estate at 10% of its value. Okay, and it starts, you know, I mean, this is basically what they did in the Ukraine, and take over all the civic and political institutions and start, you know, shaping them into what is American policy, which of course is free enterprise. The idea that Americans can come into those countries, investors who have a lot of capital, a lot of money to spend, so that the International Monetary Fund can come in into a country that's been destroyed and tell the new leaders, look, we'll give you, you know, $100 million as investment to rebuild your infrastructure. All you have to do is hire Halliburton or Brown Root. And now all of a sudden the Americans are in their force and they're building up the whole country, and American corporations are getting all the money. All right, so that's what the CIA does. It goes in and it depends, you know, do we need to destroy this country? So can we just tip it a little bit? You know, how much of it is already following American policy? How can we, you know, then back at CIA Brain Central, you know, they did make all these determinations, and they have, they operate out of 800 military bases that are spread around the world. There's a CIA station in every country in the world. They have it all very, very systematically organized. And again, not to belabor the point, but it's, you know, we live in a global village, and the same thing is happening here in the United States. It's just the United States presents unique problems, okay? Again, because it's here at home, and it's hard to determine, it's ambiguous as to what it exactly means to be an American. And how do you affect American policy in a country, America, which doesn't even know what its own identity is? And a guy like Donald Trump comes along and he says, well, the identity is a blonde guy plowing a field in Idaho. And it's not a Mexican, and it's not a black, and it's, you know, it's just, you know, a pretty blonde woman. And that's what an American is. You know, and then other people, Black Lives Matter or whatever, you know, they're trying to say, no, we're Americans too. And so there's all sorts of conflict that's going on, and it presents unique challenges to the people who have put all these systems in place for organizing political and social movements. And basically, they're doing what they do in foreign countries. They're destabilizing our country and our society by pitting one force against the other, so that the people, the average citizens, are never able to actually unify and create a common identity and then work together for their own self-interests.
And so what's the end game? Is it a new world order, a one world government? Is there something bigger than that in your research?
Oh, you know, there's what it means to be a human being. You know, is that okay answer? You know, I mean, all of us, like I have, the example I give is one of the first people that William Colby introduced me to was a guy named Evan Parker. Evan Parker had been in the OSS, and so had Colby. They knew each other. They were both in the Jedburgh program. Parker went to Burma and, you know, fought up in northern Burma with Kachin guerrillas against the Japanese, and then went into the CIA. And anyway, he was in the Far East Asia division when Colby ran it. So when Colby wanted a guy to run the Phoenix program in 1967, he chose this guy, Evan Parker. And Parker was the first guy that Colby sent me to. And I went to interview Parker. And Parker was living in this, you know, nice middle-class house in Rockville, Maryland. His wife had died. He'd had a little stroke. He was a big, tall guy, avuncular, you know, like your uncle, really friendly, invited me in. Because Colby had sent me, he said, you know, I'll tell you, you know, Colby said to talk to you, so I will. And here's a guy, I mean, just a really nice guy. He was tutoring a woman in his Episcopalian church to become the first female deacon. You know, he was trying to be he was a liberal guy, you know, he didn't want the church to be patriarchal. He helped me out a ton. He at one point said, I'm going to go downstairs and make us some tea and cookies. And he put a file folder on the coffee table in this room where we were. And he, you know, he winks and he goes downstairs, and I open the file folder up, and it's a list of it's a roster of who was in the Phoenix program on his staff. You know, and I worked down all the names, you know, and then 15 minutes later, he yells up, Doug, I'm coming up, you know, and I closed the folder and, you know, put my notes away, you know, I mean, he gave me most of the leads I needed, you know, a lot of them to get started on the book. And I met him about a year and a half later. And we went to Fort Myer, which is an officers club at Arlington, you know, where the cemetery is. And Parker's father had been a pilot in World War I and had actually learned to fly planes at the airfield at Fort Myer. This is a guy whose ancestry went back to the Revolutionary War. You know, I mean, I'd never been in Fort Myer, you know, officers club. And it was February, and we're walking down we had a parking lot that was above the fort. And it was February, and it had been snowing, and there was sleet, and there was the steps leading down were icy. And he'd had a stroke, like I said. So he puts his arm through mine. You know, we're both dressed up in our finest, you know, suits and ties and wool jackets, and we walk down these steps, and we get to a little landing, you know, where it makes a turn, and it starts going down further. And he was even tall. I'm 6 feet tall. He's a little taller than me. He wasn't wearing a hat. He had this ruddy Welsh face. The wintry mix is hitting his skin, so it's kind of very ruddy. And his tears coming down his eyes. And he said, you know, when I was in the OSS, they told me, someday you're going to be in a farmhouse somewhere. You're going to be talking with partisans about sabotaging a train, making out your plans. And you're going to notice in another room that an 8-year-old kid has been listening to everything you're talking about. And he looked up into the sky, you know, with just a forlorn face, tears pouring out of his eyes. And he said, well, you know what you got to do. You know, out of nowhere, you know. So here's a guy who would run into the neighbor's house if it was on fire and save their family and the kids and the dogs and the cats. and then is also capable of slitting the throat of an 8-year-old who overheard the secret plans he was making. What's it all about? You know, people can be very kind in one moment, and they can be murderers in the next, and they can run society, or they can be the guy living next door to you. You know, the things my father did in that prison camp. He was not proud of it. He was ashamed of what I had to do to survive. And that's what happens when you live in a very aggressive society and people are going to war all the time. You have lots of people who are being traumatized all the time. And our whole society, our whole culture, which is overly aggressive, and which, you know, in which militarism is kind of a national religion. You know, I mean, you can't even have a football game anymore without that 14s flying overhead and special forces guys parachuting onto the plane, you know, the playing field, and everybody saluting and having tears for the soldiers, you know, who basically don't feel that way about themselves. You know, I mean, soldiers don't say to each other when they're alone drinking tea, "Thank you for your service, Joe." You know, "Oh, well, thank you, Charlie." You know, I mean, it's not that way. It's a show. It's a spectacle. It's fake. And it's a culture that venerates all this militarism. And, you know, you get to the point where a bunch of gun-token Proud Boys start waving flags and attack the Capitol thinking that they represent democracy. You know, I mean, how does it happen? Well, it happens because of all the things that we've believed for 250 years, which have turned us into people who, on the one hand, are capable of great compassionate acts of kindness, and on the other hand, are capable of slitting the throat of an 8-year-old, or storming the Capitol and believing that the election was stolen from Donald Trump when it was not. But people get fervently believing in these things, and the answer is with the gun and is with violence, and all that aggressive energy can be channeled by the psychological warfares who are determining what the messages are that we're receiving. So we're in this quandary where everything that we have to believe, everything we believe or have been taught to believe in the high schools and grade schools and everything we hear on TV has to be unlearned. So how do you go about doing that? You know, I mean, I don't know. You know, I mean, as an individual, I've been lucky because I've gotten to look into the face of all this stuff. I've been able to see past the bullshit, you know, but my voice doesn't get out there. I mean, it's not like people are listening to me all over the place, or even that if they did listen to me, it would motivate them to examine their own beliefs and to try to find some way to navigate this bullshit by, first of all, reconstructing who they are and building themselves up into something that's you know, really just not so overly aggressive, but goes against all the psychological warfare that we hear, you know, and it's able to tune it out. So, you know, it's a big problem. And it means reconstructing each one of us individually, as well as all of our communities and the nation itself, so it can reconstruct a kind of a national identity and individual identities, which aren't a cowboy with a gun shooting Indians, you know, or something like that, you know, until it's, you know, something more pacifistic and humane. And that's the thing that all my books are trying to get at, is to show people that the path of the CIA, the path of the military is not the way you want to go. You know, it doesn't mean that these are bad guys because they believed in what they were doing. It just means that your beliefs are not your own. And somehow you have to really awaken, you know, take a lot of LSD for a year. And, you know, I mean, that's what I would, you know, prescribe to people, you know, put down your guns and take a lot of LSD for a year and then come back and see if you need the gun anymore, and the chances are you won't, you'll realize that there's a better way and that it really is possible to treat everybody with kindness and to not be afraid of all the people who don't look like you, and that it's actually fun to meet foreign people and people who aren't like you. And, assuming that they're not as brainwashed as people who feel the need to resort to violence.
So based on everything you just said, how much of what has gone on this past year do you think is controlled and manipulated by the CIA? All of what we've been living through this past year?
Well, the CIA put a lot of systems in place, okay, and they had a lot of control over the messaging for years and years. Nobody on Fox News or MSNBC, even though they're on opposite sides of the political crisis that we're in, right? Neither one of them ever talks about the CIA. They don't name CIA officers. They don't say, and today in the Congo, the CIA is supporting this particular warlord and installing this particular politician in order to make it easier to get to build the microchips in your iPhones. They don't do it either side. So the CIA has a tremendous influence over everything that's going on in terms of having this blanket secrecy over covert operations and national security operations. And, that's sort of like all, apart from taking LSD, a prerequisite is destroying the secrecy of the CIA, destroying the secrecy of the military, so that people actually know what their government is doing and what their face really looks like, as opposed to the mask that they wear in front of us, okay, and the mask that all the major news medias, right and left and center, are obligated to present. So, getting rid of that mask of secrecy is more important than the actual things that the CIA does. You got to break through all the secrecy, and that's a monumental task, because the justice system, the Department of Justice, all of the laws of the country protect the CIA and protect the military from ever revealing what it really is and what it's really doing. So, in a sense, and it's so complicated, what they're actually doing, which is easily explained and you can, imagine it for yourself, is less important than actually destroying all the secrecy around what they're doing, so that these things become knowledgeable to us, available to us, average citizens, every day. And so that you actually see the bombed out villages. You actually see what the faces of the people who are on the CIA payroll. I'll actually know what the CIA is up to everywhere. Then that would be a breakthrough. So, maybe 2 more minutes. I'm talked out, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate your time, Doug. It's been an honor and a pleasure. You're a wealth of knowledge and information, and we're just trying to help get the information out there, spread the truth. And, one of the things you often hear is it's easier to trick someone than it is to convince them they've been tricked. And even in presenting your information and other people like you, your work, it's still hard to get through to some people, even when you have it on paper and present it to them to see it. So thank you for your research and your work. And it's been an honor and a pleasure too.
Well, thanks for letting me ramble. And, maybe, I have a website, douglasvalentine.com. So if you're interested in reading any of my books, that's where you can go.